The waiver wire is pretty much barren, and if you've been looking for someone to help your fantasy football team heading into week 4, it's really going to be a chain or bust. Headliner Nation, everybody's been scooping up the waiver wire the first couple of weeks of the season. And heading into week 4, there's not going to be a whole lot of people that you're probably going to be looking to add to your fantasy team. But it doesn't mean that we still shouldn't be taking a look to the future and maybe trying to find some people that can help us later in the season. And as of this recording, there's still 2 Monday night games left to go. And those 2 games could present some more opportunities for players that we should be grabbing off the waiver wire. If that were to happen, we'll update this video by pinning a comment in the section down below. But for now, we've got to jump into some running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends that we may be able to utilize in the coming weeks. Then we've got a couple of quarterbacks and defensive special teams that we could potentially stream, and I'll have another list of potentially droppable players. All right, let's hop right into the running back position. Even though the reports are saying that Saquon Barkley could be back for their week 4 game, I think grabbing Matt Breida is going to be a really good idea for those of you that have very little depth at the running back position or also have Saquon Barkley. He's not going to score you a ton of points, and this last game wasn't that great either, and we knew that going into it. But moving forward for Matt Breida, who else are we going to start if we're really that decimated by injuries? Right now, the running back position is really banged up. It's going to get better as the season wears on. But for now, we might be looking for any possible scenario where we would need to drop him into our lineup. Now, I will 100% admit, I didn't even include Devon Achane in our waiver wire video last week, because I was shocked that he's under 50% owned right now. In fact, when I saw people talking about how he's going to be the guy that needs to be picked up off the waiver wire this week, I was like, there's no shot he's even available in a majority of the leagues. Then when I went and looked, he's under 50% owned in multiple platforms, and he's under 60% owned in the others. It's like everyone just gave up on him after the preseason hype. But good luck trying to figure out this backfield with him and Raheem Mostert scoring at will against Denver on Sunday. Listen, Denver's defense can't stop the run to save their lives. Moving forward, is it going to be as easy? Probably not, but it doesn't matter. The dude scored 4 touchdowns this past week. We're absolutely adding him to our rosters. Kamara will be done with his suspension and back on the active roster next week. And more importantly, will end up being the lead back for those teams that have been waiting for him to get through his suspension. Jamal Williams headed to the IR, and Kendre Miller didn't do a whole lot this past week. But you got to assume that he's going to help Kamara kind of ease back into that role. I would expect Kendre Miller to still split maybe a 50-50 or even a 40-60 for Kamara backfield next week. Keep an eye on that. If you're really desperate for somebody at the position to start, Kendre Miller might not be worth a whole lot of points for you, but he also might not put up a 0 either. Everyone continues to wait on Roschon Johnson, and Khalil Herbert hasn't done anything to lose his job as of yet. Now, he did have a fumble this past week, but honestly, that's not the worst thing that happened to the Bears. From an efficiency standpoint, Khalil Herbert continues to be just as good, if not better, than Roschon Johnson. Neither of them were that great this past week against Kansas City, given how far they were behind, but there will be better days for this offense moving forward. Fingers crossed, or at least much better matchups that might not be blowing them out by halftime. Got to continue to keep an eye on this. Is Roschon Johnson startable right now? He is not, but he could be very soon. Tyjae Spears hasn't even really done anything at this point to warrant a roster spot, but this offense continues to play from behind. And because of that, Spears continues to find himself out on the field every once in a while. Now, right now, Derrick Henry is banged up, and he's coming off a matchup against a very tough defense that was going to make it hard to run anyway. We were being very cautious with him this week. But moving forward, if this offense cannot play from in front, if they can't get Derrick Henry the ball and run the ball like they want to, Spears is probably going to start finding himself on the field more and more often, just because they don't have anybody really making plays for them on that side of the ball right now. All right, moving on to the wide receiver position, we have several guys that we're going to fly through right now. Kicking it off, Darius Slayton, New York Giants. This is a guy that is up near the team lead in targets every single week. Jalen Hyatt really isn't getting any looks, and Darius Slayton is the big play guy in this offense right now. Josh Downs had 12 targets this past week, which ended up leading the team. We know Anthony Richardson has liked him. Now we've seen Gardner Minshew like him. Not sure who the starting quarterback in week 4 will be, but I think we really need to keep an eye on Josh Downs in PPR leagues because of the amount of targets he's getting as the wide receiver 2 behind Michael Pittman. Elijah Moore led the Browns in targets this past week, and they're doing some different things to move him around. He had a reception out of the backfield, and they're trying to get creative with no Nick Chubb. We'll see what happens with this offense as Kareem Hunt continues to work his way in, if Jerome Ford stays the starter, but Elijah Moore right now, as long as they're throwing the football, is definitely a decent bet for targets each week. Marvin Mims is going to be a boom or bust guy. He might only get 4 or 5 targets a week, but if he catches 3 of those targets, he's going to close in on 100 total yards because of his big playability. He's the number 3 wide receiver in this offense right now, and people are paying so much attention to Sutton and Judy that he definitely has the opportunity to rip off a big play every time. I'm trying to throw together a few names for those of you in deeper leagues, and Braxton Berrios is going to be one of those guys. Jalen Waddle, if he does end up coming back next week from his concussion, then this won't matter at all. But if he were to miss another week, Craycraft was also injured this past week. Berrios could see a little bit of an increase not only in snap percentage, but target percentage. A lot of people moved on from Kendrick Bourne after Devontae Parker came back this past week. But going up against the New York Jets in week 3, Kendrick Bourne led the team in targets once again. And even though he didn't have a huge week, he still seems to be the wide receiver 1 on this team. Curtis Samuel isn't doing a ton right now, but he's being utilized more than Jahan Dotson. They're moving him around the formation, definitely utilizing him in those short to intermediate routes, but then every once in a while, they'll slip him out to the sideline for a pretty big gain. Keep an eye on Curtis Samuel over the coming weeks, especially if there's any injuries in the Washington wide receiver core. Romeo Doubs and Jaden Reed. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens with these guys when Christian Watson potentially makes his return next week. He was super close to coming back this week. Doubs, he had a good game week 1, then disappeared week 2, and then bounced back in week 3. Jaden Reed, didn't really see him a whole lot week 1, but over the last couple of weeks, he's looked like a guy that's going to potentially break out. But with Christian Watson potentially back into the fold, that is going to bring a lot of question marks with how targets are going to be distributed. Tank Dell is probably going to be one of the biggest ads for all waiver wires this coming week, and it makes sense. He's coming off back-to-back good games. He showed that explosiveness this past week. CJ Stroud was throwing the ball to him. The question is going to be, is it going to be a difference between him and Nico Collins from week to week? In the first 2 weeks, Nico Collins was kind of that big play guy. In week 3, it was Tank Dell. That's going to be one thing that we want to keep an eye on. Tank Dell, I don't think is going to be a top 12 receiver every single week. And I don't think he's going to have that big play to help boost his stats every single week. But definitely one thing we know is we should probably have him on our radar right now. Unfortunately, this morning, reports are showing that Mike Williams probably tore his ACL, which means Quentin Johnson and Josh Palmer are going to need to step up in his absence. And the Los Angeles Chargers are definitely throwing the ball, and they're throwing it a lot right now. So there could end up being enough available targets for both of these guys, especially considering that Austin Eckler has been banged up. Right now, if I were to take a little bit of a guess on what's going to happen, Josh Palmer will be the guy to own a little bit more over the next few weeks, while Quentin Johnson starts to slowly settle into that role. And then as the season wears on, Quentin Johnson will become the guy that has a little bit more big play upside over Josh Palmer. If I had to pick one guy right now, if you need someone right away, it's Josh Palmer. If you're pretty well set and you're willing to hold for a few weeks, then it's Quentin Johnston. Adam Thielen and DJ Chark both coming off good games this past week. It will be interesting to see what happens if Bryce Young is the starter next week instead of Andy Dalton. DJ Chark, though, really is going to be the big play guy for this offense. Jonathan Mingo hasn't done a whole lot as of yet. Terrace Marshall still isn't showing what he showed in college. DJ Chark is going to be the guy that's going to separate down the field. And given how much Bryce Young has been checking down, we'll see if that big play potential becomes fantasy viable. And Adam Thielen, I don't know if he's going to be the guy for Bryce Young once he comes back, but with the way he played this past week, he absolutely should be. All right, the tight end landscape is not great this week. I've only really got 2 guys to take a look at, and only really one of them I'm actually thinking about picking up. Donald Parham is scoring touchdowns, but that's really all he's doing right now. Now, with the injury to Mike Williams, does that potentially open up a little bit more for the tight ends? Yeah, It could, but I don't see him being more heavily utilized than what they are right now, because Josh Palmer and Quentin Johnson can step in with ease. So Donald Parham really is only a guy that I think that we're going to play in really high touchdown potential matchups for really deep leagues. And Jake Ferguson, he's getting the targets right now. He's just not getting a whole lot of production. This past week should have been a huge coming out party for Jake Ferguson given the matchup. But unfortunately, the Arizona Cardinals just, I don't know if they confused the Dallas Cowboys or what happened, but they played really well this past week. Jake Ferguson is a guy that we're waiting for that breakout to happen. But until then, let's just hope that he continues to get the targets. All right, only a couple of options at the quarterback position that we could potentially stream this week. And CJ Stroud is going to be first up. This guy has back-to-back weeks with 20 or more fantasy points with an offensive line that is absolutely banged up. He is also playing like a guy that should have been the #1 overall pick. My quarterback one in this year's draft, CJ Stroud, is looking fantastic, and he's keeping the Houston Texans offense in all the games. How about Jameis Winston? If you're out there and you're really itching for someone that you need to start, you can start Jameis Winston. He's going to give you 300 yards, he's going to give you 3 touchdowns, and he's going to throw 3 interceptions as well. For defensive special teams, we're going to take a look at the Minnesota Vikings, who are getting the Carolina Panthers, one of the worst offenses in all of football. They did play a lot better this week with Andy Dalton, but even with that being said, lots of opportunities for turnovers and lots of opportunities for sacks. And then the Seattle Seahawks going up against the New York Giants, because the New York Giants offense has looked like crap in all but 2 quarters this season. And heading into this week, I mean, if they don't get Saquon Barkley back, they could be in trouble once again. All right, a few players that we can take a look at potentially dropping, and I'm not telling you that you need to drop these players. I'm just telling you that if you're looking to drop somebody, that these would be some of the guys that I think are first up right now. Back on the list this week, Zach Charbonnet, Rashad Penny, even Tank Bigsby. These guys are not getting enough work with the way the running backs are playing in front of them right now to even be worth a roster spot. Now, if something were to happen to the running back in front of them, that's fine, but we're waiting and hoping for an injury, and you shouldn't be doing that in football. Dalton Schultz is becoming an even bigger bust at the tight end position. Brevin Jordan is scoring touchdowns right now over him. Rashad Bateman only had 3 targets this week. He's behind Nelson Aguilar, Mark Andrews, Zay Flowers, and even OBJ when he comes back. Samaje Perine is just not being utilized. Even in a game where they started falling behind this week, he wasn't getting any targets. It's clear that what they're doing right now in Denver just isn't working. The whole reason we draft AJ Dillon is for when Aaron Jones misses time, and he's missed the last 2 weeks, and AJ Dillon still hasn't done anything, so he can go do nothing on the waiver wire. Juwan Johnson was in trouble the minute that they signed Jimmy Graham, and Jimmy Graham ended up scoring the touchdown this past week, and that is where Juwan Johnson is supposed to be making his money. For the last 2 weeks, I've cautioned you all that huge games from Joshua Kelly were not likely, but because of how often the Los Angeles Chargers play in the red zone, he had a lot of touchdown potential. Oh boy, he's been awful. Even when Austin Eckler is out, I don't even think we need to consider starting him anymore. It's Eckler or bust on that team. And for Ty Chandler, if you were holding him and waiting for him to potentially make a move on Alexander Madison, Madison actually played a lot better this week, but Cam Akers would like a word with you as well. All right, Headliner Nation, there you have it. A lot of players to take a look at to potentially pick up or drop this week for the waiver wire. If you've got questions about your specific roster, maybe somebody we didn't talk about in the show, make sure you leave that comment down below. I'll get to as many people as I possibly can. Keep your questions short though. Just say, hey, add this player, drop this player, and I'll say yes or no. But for now, I'm gonna get out of here, ladies and gentlemen. Make sure you hit that like button on the way out. Subscribe if you're new here to the channel, and have a great rest of the week. Peace out, stay safe, and stay healthy, and I'll catch you all on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.